Okay, ladies, I'm setting it live and it's loading.
Hey.
Oh, yeah, that'll be nice. All right, we are now streaming live and I have pressed record, so we all good to go. Yay, no technical drama this time. I'm excited. Shout out to Voices of Faith, Pastor Buckley, and team on, I'm trying to get this thing off my arm, for helping me make sure I have no technical glitches this evening. Ladies, welcome, welcome, welcome to Standing Straight in a Crooked Room. Roundtable Talk with Dawn Shanae Collins. I am Dawn Shanae Collins. I have with me this evening Representative Patricia Haynes Smith, Judge Yvette Alexander, Professor Angela Allen Bell, young activist and move-in shaker Maria Harmon, and joining us shortly will be Leah Cullins, Dr. Leah Cullins. I'm excited for you all to join me this evening. I feel like this is a long overdue conversation. I'm gonna just say a few words as part of my welcome and opening statement. I wanted to make sure to prepare some thoughts as we open, because I want to be clear that while the goal of this webinar, this roundtable talk is about lifting up what's going on in the Black female experience, nothing is intended to be divisive. Is not an attack on the Black male experience or the white female experience or anybody else's experience. But if we don't share amongst each other and also share with others, then there's no awareness that there's something a little different going on. Our experiences are unique, and some things need to be remedied and addressed. And so that's why we're here tonight. I'll just also say, again, this convo is not about being divisive. Human beings have a great capacity to love and care for one another. We also have, unfortunately, a capacity to be hateful and power hungry, and that often shows up as oppression against women, against people of color. But it has shown up in this nation in many forms. Historically, even white men have been oppressed. You know, if you wouldn't own property and wealthy, addressing the Black female experience to share our story and create awareness so that there might be positive change. And so I'll let each lady introduce themselves about 2 minutes, just share who you are, and then we'll move through getting into the nitty gritty of it all. Ms. Pat, Rep. Pat, you wanna start?
Yes, I'll start, Don. Of course, I'm former Representative Pat Smith, but that's okay. A lot of people still say Rep. Smith. Don, I want to thank you for allowing me to be a part of this intergenerational conversation. Since I know that, you know, I am probably one of, he's been through a lot more than some of these ladies have been through because of my age, but that's okay. But they are all, I'm just glad to be on here with all of them. But my experience in Baton Rouge and other places, of course, I've been on the school board, I've been in the legislature for 12 years. I've been a community activist. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a grandmother, I'm a great grandmother. And I just want to see how we can make sure that women are able to get their just due in this climate that we are in this environment that we are going through right now in our country. And I just want to give a shout out to Helen Reddy, who died today, because I am woman and hear me roar. Hear me roar. Yes.
All right. Judge Yvette.
Hi, Dawn. Thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. I feel honored to be here. I agree with Pat. It's an intergenerational panel, which is always good because sometimes the way that meaning myself, over 60, we look at things differently from people who are 40 and under or those in between. However, we still have one thing in common. We're all African American and we're all women. My ideas were molded very young. My father had 5 girls, and once he realized that he had 5 girls, he sat us down and he always had this saying. He would say that it costs to be Black. And by that he meant because you are Black, you're going to have to work harder to get the things that you want simply because of where we live in the United States of America. Secondly, he'd say you have to work twice as hard because you're Black and 3 times as hard because you're a woman, because of the way that the world feels about women and what we can or cannot do. But in that same breath, he told us that we can do anything that we want to do. From being a person who would sweep the streets to being the president of the United States. All we had to do was give it our all. And he believed that education was the answer to most of our problems, or education was the answer to our being successful. So just a little bit about me. I grew up in Grambling, Louisiana. It's a very small town, population 4,000. My dad was the mayor, 5 girls in a family. We always had to hear, where's the boy, or the jokes about the boy. And my dad would always say, I heard somebody else said that lately, but my dad would say he's the king and we're all princesses. And so that we grew up in a family where it was okay to be Black and it was okay to be a woman. It was great for you because that's how God made you, and however God made you is how you are supposed to thrive. I graduated from Grambling State University, and then I went to the LSU Law Center. I practiced law in Baton Rouge for 17 years, including working at the Public Defender's Office, working over in the House of Representatives, the Senate, and also working for Secretary of State Fox McKithen. Then I was elected judge in 1995, and I have been a judge since then. I will celebrate my 25th judicial anniversary in October. And no, it was not easy. Law was a male-dominated profession when I entered into it. I don't know, we might be outnumbering them by now, but back then it was a male-dominated profession as a lawyer and as a judge. So I'm happy to be a part of this panel, and I hope that I can add some goodness or some enlightenment to it. Thank you.
Professor Bell.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to speak many voices. I teach while Black, I parent while Black, I earn a living while Black, I experience healthcare while Black, and I experience law while Black. And I have now lived long enough to understand that for African American women in America, doing every single thing right is often just not enough to ensure success, equality, or respect. So I have told you what I am. Here is what I'm not. I am not a contortionist. I don't try to fit the distortion. I choose to stand up straight in a space that is extremely uncomfortable.
Thank you so much. Dr. Leah Cullins. Yeah, I see you juggling.
Yeah, I just pulled up to hop on the call, so I'm so sorry. Patience ran
That's
over
right.
again today as usual, you know. First of all, I'm happy to be here with all you wonderful ladies, especially most of you ladies who I've grown up admiring and having on a pedestal. So I just thank God that I'm able to be on that panel, you know. Yes. To talk about myself, I'm a professor of nursing at the Southern University School of Nursing, and I'm a nurse practitioner. I work here, and I also work out in New Orleans taking care of COVID patients. Not just that, but I'm also the second vice chair of the DSCC, recording secretary of DPEC, and I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter. Anyone that knows me knows the magnitude and the depths of how deep my family ties run. And that's just something that's just known about my family. You know, some people call it a dysfunctional family, but we just call it, you know, coming up, that's all we had, that's all we know, and that's all we're gonna be, you know. I'm here to talk about being Black as a woman, and like you mentioned, Professor Angela, about being Black in healthcare. And I'm a healthcare professional, but I've been on the opposite side as well, where I almost lost my life being Black, being a Black woman rather, during healthcare. So I just wanted to share a little bit of my knowledge, my little background, and how I grew up was I grew up fairly poor, and knowing I was instilled in me that to get out of poverty, you had to have education. And so I continued to high school, bachelor's, master's, postmaster's, postdoctoral degree to be who I am and to encourage other Black women to get the education, because that's how you can change any situation, is by becoming educated. So that's just a little bit about me for the beginning. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Dr. Mims. Wait.
All right, so thank you. I'm grateful to be here. So much has already been said that I think could be echoed by all of us, being 64 years old, experiencing the civil rights movement, dealing with racial injustices outside of my race, and also dealing with discrimination inside my race. Because I'm a dark-skinned African American. Yes. And so all of those issues too that we don't always talk about, that take place inside of our race, and how that impact me. And I hope to have an opportunity to add to the conversation from that perspective as well. I'm a high school dropout, a teenage mother with a learning disability and 2 PhDs. I feel like I'm a living testimony of what can be done when a person is motivated to believe in themselves and is willing to fight for what they desire, despite the obstacles that they may face. I thought when Leah was talking, and when Belle was talking, I was thinking about when I began my professional career in mental health counseling, and I started in workers' comp, and it was a field that was dominated by white males. So there were few women, and there were even fewer Blacks. And even having to deal with what I face every day in my work, but also having to deal with what I face sometimes even in my home with my spouse being comfortable. I'm just keeping it real, being comfortable with his wife working in a field that is dominated by men. I'll summarize by saying this: I know the power of an education. I've lived it. I'm a testimony for the difference in not only the doors of opportunities, but also in the way you are perceived. One of the things that I often said and continue to say is I've been a community advocate and fighting for education in my community for years, long before I was adopting anybody. And some of the same things that I say today are the same things that I said before I was a doctor. But the fact that I have these initials behind my name now gives me greater access and credibility. I don't think that that's fair, but I accept the reality. Just as I don't think that it is fair that I have to deal with discrimination as an African American and as a woman. I am a mother. I am a grandmother. I'm a great grandmother. Uh, I am a big sister that is more of a surrogate mother, and I have more extra children than I can count. More extra children than I can count that I'm very, very proud of. So I hope that I'll have something that will inspire and lend to the conversation.
All right, and activist extraordinaire Maria Harmon.
Good evening, everyone. And I just, I'm really thankful I was given an opportunity to speak on the panel. And it's just really an honor to be among all the other great, powerful Black women around this area on this panel as well. Just speaking from someone who's just from Louisiana and have just experienced matriculating throughout my career as a Black person, and also being from the South. There's so many intersectionalities that come with being a Black woman altogether. There are so many different stigmas, systemic racism, regionalism, because I've just been blessed with many opportunities to just pursue a career in community organizing and actually running a nonprofit as grassroots, mobilizing people in two major metropolitan areas in New Orleans and Baton Rouge. And this is something that I literally co-founded, started from scratch with my colleague, Benjamin Zucker. And he and I lead so many different paths in life altogether, with him being a white male and me being a Black woman. But also, it's just really astounding at times to just really be in situations where you talk about it, but then to really experience something and then for it to really resonate with you in a way that really affirms, you know, your beliefs. I've been put in a position to be able to hire people that are like from Louisiana, because in the South, on a national level, regionalism is a real thing. We can be in a Black space with many other Black people at times, and regionalism will rear its head, where you have the North folks looking at the Southern folks like, oh, y'all didn't know that? Y'all didn't think that? But I'm proud to be a young leader and also a Black woman, to really be amongst those people and hold my own, and also be a representative for my area, where I'm like from this area and have gained all of my development and never left this state. So I just really feel like that speaks to the talent that's out here.
All right, ladies, thank you for sharing. And since I've left my guest share, I'll share briefly. As mentioned, I'm, Dawn Shanae Collins. Some people don't realize, because I've been divorced for 2 decades, that Collins is not my birth name. Shanae is my birth name. Collins is my formerly married name. And I am a mother and a bit of a traditionalist in the sense that, once I divorced, I didn't want to have a different name from my sons. And so there you have Dawn Shanae Collins. And so, I'm a mother. My sons are young adults, 24 and 23. And I'm a GG of Mr. Eden Stefan Collins, the best grandson on the planet. Like all grandmothers think of their grandkids. So like my story in terms of the Black female experience, I like to share about my grandfather, Reverend Wilmer Castle, who's deceased now. He died at the age of, we think, 98, because no official birth certificate, right? And my boys were small, so I was so this is about 20 years ago, my grandfather passed. But one thing that I love to share about him was that he had daughters and sons, but he taught them both. Your education, your education, your education. And my mother always shared that he stressed to her as the baby girl that for you get your education so you don't have to depend on anybody. And it wasn't that he taught her especially as a minister, excuse me, it wasn't that he taught her that she didn't need a man at all. It was that, hey, you never put yourself in a position where you have to, you may end up compromised. And so I carry that with me. And I'm glad that he instilled that in his daughters as well as his sons. And so with that, what I like to move to is just throwing out some things. So some people may not be aware of stats on pay gap. We hear about equal pay for women. And I'm glad that Professor Bell had shared a tweet with me about equal pay, and I misspoke. And so I'm glad to make that correction. I was working on some stats that I had seen at a presentation provided by somebody from the state at AAUW state conference, but it was like 10, 15 years ago. So it looks like I misremembered some of it. So let me share some true statistics. And I thank that sister on Twitter for pulling some information together and shedding some light. When it comes to the pay gap, there's a pay gap for those that are not familiar, because I don't want to assume that everybody here knows. But there's a pay gap between men and women, generally speaking. And then Black women and the pay gap. Let me open it. Black women in the pay gap experience a higher pay gap than white women. So when you look at the pay inequality between men and women, and then you break it down and aggregate it, the statistics fall more or less like Asian men, white men, then white women, Black men, Black females. And it came up in the tweet because it was shared about the pay gap. And then a sister chimed in and said, well, why we have to talk about, why we have to be divisive and talk about Black females, why don't we talk about what's going on with Black males? And I'm not opposed to that. But women of all races have a tendency to put our own self-care and our needs on the back burner and lift up everybody else. But you soon find out one way or another that if you don't take care of yourself, you end up depleted. Some other things just to lift up real quickly and then get into discussion. When it comes to stats on discipline, a lot of times we talk about, and we should, about the disparities between for Black males, but it is also true for Black females, that Black females get suspended and expelled at higher rates than others as well. Unfortunately, yes, Black males at a higher rate, but we can't forget to have the same conversation about our girls. And then maternity deaths. This is something that I'm just learning. I know Professor Bell and Dr. Cullins is going to get into some more details about things they've seen or statistics that they know of. But just some interesting information that regardless of income and educational attainment, Black women are two times more likely, hold up, I want to pull up the right stat, I'm sorry. Black maternal mortality rate is 2.5 times higher than white in Bleak U.S. maternal mortality report. And that's from February 5th of 2020. And you think about, I had not honestly really thought about that until very recently. And it kind of made me say, God dog, that too, and that educational attainment or income makes no difference. And so with that, I want to go ahead and discuss about the Black female experience in America and start with the perspective of between a rock and a hard place, the double burden of being both Black and female and how we navigate that. I know some of us mentioned in our intros that we know that that burden exists, but does anybody have any experience, any specific experiences on the weight of both the gender and the skin color?
I would like to add a couple of thoughts to this, because I noticed in everybody's introduction, there was a lot of attention to education. All of us, I think, attribute a lot of our success to us having been imparted the value of education. Now that I have reached the age of 50 and I have been able to sort of look back on aspects of my life, I have begun to realize that certainly education has equipped me to function in a very different way, and I'm grateful. But one of the things that I have begun to appreciate about my education is that it has not entitled me to be treated equally in the workplace. So we know that in the 60s, when we were addressing housing discrimination and race discrimination and all forms of discrimination, we got this thing called the Equal Pay Act in 1963. So we know that has been a law, equal pay for equal work, since the 60s. But what I have realized is that educated African-American women experience the same type of pay inequity as women who are not educated. Of course, the gap looks different, but there's still a gap. Interestingly, I was speaking to some justice impacted women a few weeks ago who are incarcerated, and they were telling me about some of these same disparities that they experience. So my point is, having the education creates advantages, but it also, in my experience, has positioned me to be a target of people in power who use the opportunity to oppress people for talent. So women who fit a certain profile generally experience different pleasures in the workplace. So if I tend to be more fragile, if I tend to be more needy, if I tend to be the type of woman that doesn't threaten and make men feel uncomfortable, my pay might look different. But if I tend to be a woman who is confident and who is self-assured and who does not need to date somebody's husband, my pay often is a penalty. So what we're dealing with when we talk about this gender gap, it is not just because we're women, but because often we are a certain type of woman. We are women of confidence, and that presents a threat to many of our employers. And when you talked about those little Black girls being disproportionately disciplined in schools, it often is not because they're bad, it is because they are mimicking strength. And that has always been an uncomfortable experience for men, to be across the table from a woman who has confidence. So I want to be sure when we talk about this gender pay gap, yes, women across the United States earn 80 cents for every dollar men make, but we need to realize that that looks different in Louisiana. It's even worse. Louisiana has the largest gender pay gap. It is 70 cents for every dollar a man makes. And my experience has been that the education has been a factor in causing the oppression that I have experienced. Because I am educated, I don't have to sleep with somebody's husband, and I won't. Because I am educated, I don't have to compromise, and I won't. And oftentimes that causes this gender pay gap. And it is not always by a male who does not look like us. This is happening to a lot of African-American women at the hands of men who look like us. And I think that as we talk about officers having their knees on people's neck, we need to not overlook, many of us have knees on our neck. And what I am seeing is a trend amongst my sisters where they are becoming ill by working in these spaces. The stress of it begins to toll on a person when you have given your best, you have done nothing, and you are punished for your best. So education, I'm certainly glad I have it, but it has contributed to problems in my particular journey professionally.
Thank you for sharing. Did anybody else want to share in terms of their rocking that hard place?
I think that
You know,
the point that Belle makes is an important one, but I think it's important for us to all recognize that we experience different types of discriminatory practices in every environment, right? This is just a different environment because I'm operating in a different space from when I was a janitor and I was, or when I was a cook and I was a cook and a waitress. It didn't just go away because I had an education. It just brought me to a different environment. And I think that that's important to note. I appreciate what she said about sleeping with people because sometimes I don't, after women are accused of progressing in the workplace, and oftentimes because they laid on their backs, not based on their hard work or their knowledge or their skill set. I think that when it comes to the issue of what I define as individuals who lack, that are insecure, that insecure because of my skill set. And oftentimes I've had to find myself, I won't say dumb myself down, but I will just say quiet myself down, not dumb myself down. And you're exactly right. When I think about even in my home, and I want to have that conversation. Because I always was an inquisitive child, and I always asked why, because I wanted to understand that I was accused of being rebellious. I've never been rebellious, and I've never been disrespectful, but I've always been curious. And how that even our personalities that are the difference, I'll give you a quick example. The difference between assertiveness and aggression, it depends on who you're having the encounter with. They interpret that as you being assertive or you're being aggressive. And sometimes because I ask questions, because I'm not afraid to take my position or to state my position, even when I stand alone, that may be interpreted as being aggressive and not being assertive. And so I think that there is so much that we could talk about in the short time that we have from the various perspectives of being a woman and being a Black woman in our homes, in our communities, and even in our workplace.
Did anybody else?
Yeah, you can visualize a lot of what Professor Bell and Dr. Mims have said in many of the spaces that we enter into. I do recall during my time of growing up and what have you, I grew up in segregation, total segregation. So it's very interesting that during that period of time, you of course had Blacks against Blacks a lot. The brown paper bag test was in effect. The mulattoes were in Louisiana were highly populated in Louisiana and really thought that they were much better than other Blacks. You have these experiences and then you go into a workplace and you find that the workplace bosses would hire more light-skinned Black women than they did dark-skinned Black women. So we've been through all of these kinds of things. But when you show up and you show out who you are and what you have behind you, meaning your knowledge and your expertise, they tend to back away but become defensive, very much so defensive. I experienced that at Exxon, very much so. I was an older female who went to work at Exxon and had to work in an environment. Of course, it was definitely a man's environment. but I can tell you that the confidence that I had because I was older put me in a position to be able to stand tall in that cricket place. So I had always been the person who would stand up for myself, even when nobody else did. Didn't mind saying to somebody that you're doing that wrong or you're treating me a different way. I did not have a problem saying those things. And so I was considered militant, you know, in my growing up, very much militant. And so what I possess came from my upbringing. My grandfather was the first Black secretary of the AFL-CIO. My mother, who lived to be 100 years old, was the first Black postal service person in South Baton Rouge. She ran the Louisa Street Post Office. So all of those things taught me that we could go beyond our spaces and be able to do things as long as we were willing to stand up for who we are, what we brought to the table, and that we were at the table.
Awesome. So let's drill down a little deeper. So I have an advocacy background. I started living in the world of community organizing from my experience with the Obama campaign in 2008. And I know a lot of people were energized by Obama, but I think a lot of people slept on what he actually did in terms of movement building, in the sense that the way he ran his national campaign, Joe Blow or Mary Jane off the street could literally help him if they just had a library card. They didn't even have to have their own internet connection. They can go to the library, use the library card, get on the internet, go to barackobama.com. Oh, I want to host a house party. Oh, I want to call my neighbors and say, vote for Barack, in the skill sets that it delivered. So I was part of that. I was a paid staffer for Obama. And before that, I was not really into politics much. My family talks, you know, but in terms of my own activity, I was not. And what drew me to Obama was the advocacy, was his message of one voice can change a room. And if one voice could change a room, it could change a city and change a nation, and the power of everyday people. And so working in different spaces on different causes over the years, in particular, in spaces around equal rights for women, sometimes you experience with your experience with women who are not women of color. You might agree on this issue here, but then when race pops up, and it does, then sometimes even though y'all have the same need, it's speaking even historically, right? The right to vote came first for Black men on paper, right? Then later, a whole half century later, it came for white women. And then it took the civil rights movement for it to come full circle for everybody. But that struggle to gain access to the ballot, there was division even in that. Everybody kind of coalesced. Well, I won't say everybody. Some groups decided to coalesce: Black men, white women, black women, etc., around the right to vote. But then, the powers that be said, all right, you can't have it, but I'm gonna give it to you. And people fell in line, and so on and so forth. And so drilling deeper on that double burden, I want to focus just a little bit on, okay, between the genders and how race plays out, within our gender, how race sometimes plays out. I'll share a more current example for myself. In the realm of education, I was talking to a white sister, and matter of fact, I don't know, she might even be watching, and I don't think I ever told her this, but she might realize I'm talking about her, and I have much love for her, but it is what it is. And she was just getting started in education advocacy, and at that time I was doing a lot of advocacy at the state capitol, and she was focused on one issue within education. And I was trying to explain to her, I said, it's bigger than that. I said, this issue right here is very important, but you're gonna see some of this stuff tied up in each other in the issue, in the larger issue of privatization altogether of public ed. And she blew it off, okay, yeah, you've been doing education advocacy for some years now, and I'm just hopping up on the scene, but okay. And so then, she had to find out for herself. And so, and she did. And we were able to work on some things together, once she came to that realization. But I'm quite sure I'm not the only one with that kind of experience where sometimes your Blackness causes folks to dismiss. And I'm quite sure she didn't even realize that's what she was doing. Not to excuse the dismissiveness, but sometimes this stuff is not about being maliciously hateful, but it still has consequences,
I have seen some of what you described in my teaching capacity, because I have experienced oftentimes some students will refer to me as Professor Bell. I have a lot of students that will call me Miss Bell. And the idea of calling me professor is very unnatural for some students. A miss seems a little bit more comfortable. But because I'm a student of history, that does not offend me. I understand where it comes from. And I think some of our work is to always educate people about history and how it continues to cripple us as a society, because our imagery in this country started on those plantations. The roles that we would play really got defined on those plantations. And if you understand that history, you realize there has never been a moment in this country where we have gone back to correct that damage. No. So what role did a Black woman play on the plantation? She was there for your sexual pleasure. She was there to cook your food. So she was a servant staff. And what role did a Black man play? He was a breeder. He was a laborer. And so when we now fast forward, at what moment has history ever been corrected? So it is difficult for the average person to walk into a space and see an African-American woman and view her in any other light. So she is the breeder. She is the servant class. And the idea of her being an intellectual is just too painful for a lot of people to comprehend. If you watch the footage from Alton Sterling, the first thing I thought about was that role that he was supposed to play. This is a caste system in Louisiana. And as a Black man, when a white man comes to you and tells you a command, you ought to be obedient. And because he did not instantly obey, he paid with his life. But if you don't understand history, none of that makes sense to you. Alton Sterling was supposed to play his historical role. He was supposed to say, yes, master. He was supposed to be obedient and submissive. He was not supposed to play the role of a man, or far less a human being who thought he was entitled to respect. So I see that often in my interactions with students, because the idea that I might be an intellectual is just too much for somebody to grapple with. So it is more natural to call me a miss than it is a professor. A law professor, that is just uncomfortable for a lot of people. Now, this is when it changes, because I agree with you. You'll say to a person, I've been doing this 30 years, I've done this, I've done this. It doesn't matter to people, because you're still that Black woman. You're the cook, you're the hired help. When they notice different is when they realize that you are the best at performing that task. That's when people stop calling me miss. When it occurs to them that there is nobody else that can do it the way I do it, because I am not a breeder. That's what it takes, though, for me to show you, because I don't have the privilege of a presumption. So all day I am constantly working to convince people, and that ultimately creates a health burden. the stress that I have on me with all of my other challenges to convince you all day long that I am not that stereotype that you were taught. So somehow in this discussion, as we talk about all of these individual challenges, you add them up cumulatively, and it explains why we have heart conditions and why we have weight conditions and why we have disproportionate everything, because this is ultimately a health condition that is not unique to Black women, it's unique to Black people. In my opinion, this really is a public health problem at this point. And when I say this, I mean racism, sexism, gender discrimination. It is a public health problem. And I would like to see that become the response, because once you declare it a public health problem, it's not on an individual to sue and make it right. It's not on an activist group to confront it. It becomes the burden of the government. And by the way, the government created it. So it makes logical sense to me that they should be a part of reversing some of this.
Right.
Any other?
Oh, if I could add, I totally agree with all that's been said. I even experienced a few microaggressions myself as just being a Black woman in leadership, a young Black woman at that. It's always people, oh, do you still work for Step Up? And I'm like, yeah, I co-founded it. You know, or I don't know if you would know, so I asked such and such, and I'm like, no, you can ask me anything. I'm privy to everything that's been happening. You know, nothing happens without crossing my desk or getting my purview. But it's just funny to me how people will just try your leadership like that. But I'm just grateful that I'm humble at the same time, and I don't take it personal. I take a lot of thanks to, you know, my foundation and just being an intern for the Democratic Party, dealing with politics. You gain tough skin quickly. It's a lot of egos out there. So for me, it's like, I know where my lane is. I know where my territory lies, per se. I don't really put any limits on myself, but I know where I'm most likely to thrive and lay the most benefit to. And I always look for a space of just adding value. And I just think it's funny how people operate from a place of scarcity and that mindset even. And all of that stems from white supremacy. We think things always in a scarce framework, when really we should be thinking in abundance. We should be thinking in a more communal framework. And I feel like that is the burden that's on the Black community altogether. When you think about unity in that respect, we still aren't fully unified if you really think about it. And the first thing, if you look at the principles of Kwanzaa, the 7 principles, one of the first one is unity, you know, emoja, and that just tells me everybody has to come together first before we can even lay out a game plan and strategize and problem solve, right? And we really have to unpack what are these barriers that causes us to not be fully unified. When you think about the aspect of the Black woman and the Black man, there are issues there, and patriarchy is another serious thing. The thing that's in control right now is white hetero patriarchy, right? Heteronormative patriarchy at that. And so I look at it like this: patriarchy, look at it as like a knife in a way. But when Black patriarchy rears its head, you're just turning the knife upside down. We're not getting free with that. Let's get rid of all the
oppressed becomes the oppressor.
And put a plate on here, because that's the community, right? And I feel like if we don't fix that foundation in itself within the Black community, I hate to use such a binary context, because, you know, Blackness is not a monolith. We're not, you know, so much constrained to just binary context as well. But Black people as a community, we also have to look at the Black queer community, LGBTQ plus, their own walk, trans people. They each have their own walk. I actually have very close friends I grew up with, knowing them for the past 10, 15 years. One is a Black trans man, another is a Black trans woman. And it's just amazing to just see their experience as well. And I'm just grateful to be a person of support to them as well, because it's a lot that comes with being Black altogether. But speaking to the Black woman's experience, it's just funny. I'm always gonna work from a mode of working together. One thing my mom always told me: when you're matriculating in your career and you cross certain people, she said, even Black men, you know, many cases they probably have a family. And I'm like, They really sat with me. And I paid attention to where I was at and asking certain people questions. And sure enough, many times it was like maybe 3 out of 5 men each had a family, And I'm thinking what comes with that, it doesn't, you don't have to look far to really just count and do the math. You just really have to open up your mind and pay attention and be more self-aware. And I feel like that has been like a key essential component for myself. And even dealing with education, I advocate in education justice work, and even being a substitute teacher for a period of time in Jefferson Parish, I've seen different layers of how Black children are treated and looked at. And I always notice a lot of people lay, claim to the school to prison pipeline within the context of a young Black boy's experience. But not many people pay attention to the young Black girl's experience. There's so many layers, even though it's not as high as the numbers of in extremes, as young Black males are, but young Black girls are pushed out 5 times the rate. They're discriminated against for their hair, and they have so many other extremities that they deal with. I remember dealing with one situation where I was at John Ehret High School in the West Bank in Jefferson Parish, and it was a 16-year-old girl that the day before, I had him for 3 days. The day before, we were great. The next day, we had a little tension. The next day, it was okay. But that day we had tension. I knew she had some outside issues that came with her being in that classroom that day. And I was just patient with her. I had to pray on it. I had to realize these are teenagers, even though they try you, they're still children nonetheless. And it wasn't that long ago I was in their shoes. I graduated from high school in 2006. So, I could still understand where her head was around that time. But I had to make sure I told her, hey, when I see you, I see myself. And I love you. I haven't known you that long, but I love you nonetheless, because I want to see you do well, and I know that walk. So it's, you have to be able to reach and connect with people. We really do have, that goes back to the message of unifying, but there's so many barriers with just sexism, colorism, texturism. People discriminate you against your hair, your skin tone, all that, but we really have to think in a framework of building more communal power within ourselves in unifying.
I'd like to just talk a little bit about our Black culture and how we discriminate against women or females from the beginning. Coming from a family that has 5 girls, how my dad had to always hear about, oh, you're trying to get that boy. Oh, like the boy is supposed to be the prize. Right. And then myself having 2 daughters, same thing with my husband. He had to endure that all the time about, oh, you just couldn't get that girl, boy. You kept, you should have kept trying. And now my daughters, my oldest daughter has 3 girls, and her husband has to endure that. Oh man, you ought to try again. A boy, like men are it. And now my second daughter, she has 1 daughter and she's pregnant right now. And everybody's saying, oh, I know you hope it's the boy. No, I don't. I hope it's a healthy, beautiful, wonderful baby. And I love myself for being a girl, a female. Sometimes I look at people, especially females, when they say that, oh, I don't want any girls. I only want boys. So do you hate yourself so much that you don't want another? But that's being judgmental. So I try not to do that. Well, I said that to say, to be able to stand up and do the things that we have done, we have to realize that in this society, being a girl isn't the preferred thing to be. But in my life and in my mind and where I come from, it is the preferred thing to be. And if you look back from the time we're born to where, oh, she's smart, girls are supposed to be smart, and girls are supposed to do this, and girls are supposed to do that. So not only do we have to fight against the world who's coming after us because we're Black, we also have to fight our own community because we are female. And so I think that Dr. Mims is the expert on the psychology part of this. So I'll let her talk about that. But for me, it just like disgusts me almost. I feel like when people do that or say that to me, oh, y'all have nothing but girls, you know, that it's like something bad. However, I could tell you the story. My dad's best friend had 7 boys. My dad had 5 girls. My dad was always going to get them out of trouble, going to get them out of this, going to get them out of that. And his friend was always edging him about having 5 girls. My oldest sister was a college professor. I'm a judge. My sister under me has a doctor's in education. She's over the education department at Grambling, been over a whole school system in Texas. My sister under her has a master's. She was vice president at Walmart. She's now in Memphis working at AutoZone in their corporate office. And my baby sister has a doctorate in education, and she took over my father's charter school. So, you know, just because you are female doesn't mean, I mean, so I like for us to talk a little bit about how it starts off from the time you're born until you're grown, a little more grown, me and Pat, a little more grown, me, Pat, and Jackie, a little bit more grown. But it just carries over, and it never ends. It never ends. It just never ends. So I like for us to talk about that a little.
I think that some of the reasons why it never ends is because we never fully deal with it. I may not be able to change as much of the world outside of my home that I can do inside of my home. I've often said, and there's been so much said already, I want to just compliment the things that have just been spoken. Professor Bell, you just brought out so much in your comments. All of you have, and Judge Alexander as well, because for me, if I ever write a book, it's going to be The Journey of Understanding Me.
Say it again.
The Journey of Understanding Me. Because in the journey of understanding me, I began to understand what had conditioned me to think the way I did at the time, and consequently behave the way that I did, so that I could then define who I wanted to be, regardless of what anybody else had to say. I mentioned about being an inquisitive child who always asked why I was different. And because of that, I was criticized. But this journey to understanding me, and Judge Alexander's heard some of it because the Dawn program was designed around it, was when God began to deal with me from the perspective of who I was as a believer, as a Christian. I didn't wrestle with that. I was comfortable with all of the challenges that went with that. Why I believe what I believe. I didn't wrestle with that at all. But the issue for me that I wrestled with was when he began to take me on a journey of who I was as an African American female. And that was hard for me because there were things that I had to confront on my journey. And you have to remember the times, Pat and Alex, Yvette, we have to remember the times. Our generation was seen and not heard. Our generation that wasn't necessarily afforded the opportunities to ask the kinds of questions or to even raise the kinds of issues that we were dealing with mentally and emotionally. So they went unspoken and unaddressed. And so on that journey of understanding who I am as a person of African descent, as a female, and just what Alexandria said, as Alexander said, what we had to deal with in how the culture, even in the home, defined us, let alone the culture outside of the home.
Right.
Really, growing up during the civil rights movement, while I didn't like certain things outside of my community, there was a different expectation on the inside of my community that disappointed me too. That disappointed me as well, as a woman, as a person of African descent. The expectation for the role of a female was different then And to a large extent, it is still different now. I can't depend on somebody else from the outside to address that with my children and my grandchildren. I have to address that on the inside.
Right.
In preparing them for what to do, how to deal and how to cope with these issues on the outside. When Professor Bell talked about the history, we haven't done our due diligence to talk about our history. We are uncomfortable talking about our history and slavery ourselves. So how in the hell do we expect somebody else to talk about it or to be comfortable in the conversation about it, let alone to respect it, when we don't respect it, because it's an issue for us, because we have not overcome in accepting what was done to us. We didn't do anything to ourselves. Something was done to me. So why should I be ashamed? That history part of it is so important, and I cherish the history, the experiences, even the negative ones that I've had, because I learned something from that history in order not only to better myself, but to impart something in my children and all of my extra children and the people that I encounter. And I think history, as you said, Professor Bell, is one way of beginning this conversation. Something else you said that I could relate to. I'm so tired of trying to explain myself and to justify who I am. And again, I'm going to say it again. There's a different expectation from inside my community that I have from outside. And I'm exhausted from the inside. I'm exhausted that we do not respect each other. We do not respect each other's success or compliment each other. We lack the understanding that when one rises, we all rise. Why? Because we still stay here in this community, giving back to this community. Other cultures don't necessarily do that. Other cultures really work from an independent, individual perspective. But we have been conditioned to work from a collective perspective, right? And you talked about unity. You talked about unity. How can we progress as a people when we can't unite? And then as you were talking about the unity, I reflected on Willie Lynch. He did a job, psychology, and he did a really psychological job. And what he said was true, that if implemented appropriately, that we would keep it going, and we keep it going. So I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I do want to say there's a psychology piece of this, that if you change the way you think, you'll consequently change the way you behave. But how do we change the way we think? And we can't do that if we don't have open, honest conversations about the stuff that goes on the inside that impedes our ability to be effective on the outside. If we can start on the inside, and forums like this is important, because I don't know when I've had an opportunity to sit with some sisters and talk about
I can't wait for this corona to be over with. We could do something in person with some glasses of wine.
Yes.
Leah is juggling like we all do, and she has to hop on the Zoom call, but another Zoom, and so she wanted to chime in real quick before she take your mute off.
Always, right? That's me. Right? Y'all gonna learn that's me. I just wanted to chime in on what Professor Angela said, and now Dr. Mims brought it up too, how what the role of the Black woman is as of now compared to what is slavery, and it still exists throughout history. Right. And, Dr. Mims mentioned the Willie Lynch letter, and once I read that letter, light bulbs went on in my eyes. Black women are responsible to hold the world on our shoulders, overlook ourselves, and our health suffers. As a healthcare professional myself, I see countless women come in, breast cancer, thyroid disease, diabetes, and some of those things are genetics, but some of those are exacerbated because of the stress. And like I tend to tell all my sisters, when you're gone and you're in that grave, life is going to go on for those same people that you were stressing over. You can't be mama, grandma, daddy, cousin, auntie to all of that. And until we learn to take care of ourselves and put ourselves up at the forefront, how can other people take us seriously as well? You know, sometimes we feel that we have to because no one else is going to do it. But breast cancer is affecting Black women. When Black women get breast cancer, they get it. It's more aggressive. It's harder to treat, and we die from it fast. Okay. When Black women get HIV, AIDS, they get diagnosed later. It's harder to treat, and they die from it faster. And all that goes back to history of putting ourselves on the back burner for everyone else. And then we're the ones end up sick. We're the ones end up suffering. And like when my aunt was passing, I always used to tell people, we can empathize her pain and we can feel for her, but the only person that can feel that pain from that cancer is her. So until we get to that point where we put ourselves first, and as Black women, we're supposed to be strong. So we don't let the world know that this is stressing us out, or this is hurting me. This is making my heart weak, until we have that heart attack, that massive heart attack. And sometimes we recover from it. Sometimes we don't. Or until we have that stroke and we're paralyzed. So all that to say, like Willie Lynch did a good old good on us, and it still exists today. But for me, and to you ladies, and to everybody else who's looking in, I try to instill this in all my sisters. How can you pour from an empty cup?
That's right.
Dry, desiccated, and it's gonna die out. And when we die out, what happens? Life goes on for they gonna remember you for a little while, but life goes on for everybody. And I've buried some of my family members. I buried some of my LGBT friends because of the stress, the worry, just things just because of life. And I just want to express that to you guys, that until we decide that we have to take some of this off of us and put it on others, then we'll forever be saying the same thing this year, next year, and the year after. And it's so sad to watch our women die, and people that we know die. And it's because of stress of taking everything on, stepping up and being the grandmother for your daughter's kids who daughter can't seem to get it right. It's just, and it plays a role, and you may not think so, but it plays a role in your heart, plays a role in your kidneys, all of that. So I just wanted to mention that before I head off my Zoom call. I'm very passionate about that because I've seen it happen. Heart attacks at too young, because my mom watching all the kids. Well, what mama, or taking on the role of working 2 jobs because the man is in the house playing his video games, Yes. But that's what we as Black women are supposed to do since slavery. We're supposed to cook, clean, have the relations, rear the kids, go in the fields. When do we get our rest? When do we get our peace? When is it coming? I'm 41. I've been watching it. I still haven't seen it come since I was born. When is it coming? I don't know. I don't want to be the one with the heart attack, or my mom with the heart attack. She raised 4 girls on her own in the South. That's stressful. So I love you all, and I look up to all of you guys, and I really, really thank you guys. And we need to continue this in person, or maybe on another Zoom.
All right. That sounds like a plan.
Every single one of you guys, take care of yourselves. Drink you some tea. Read a book. Be stressed.
That's my new thing.
Book. Thank you.
Audio book.
Okay.
Can I add one additional thing also? I am working on a book chapter that does a contrast between the chattel slavery and our penal system.
Ooh.
And in doing that, I have been for months reading lots of slave narratives. And one of the things that really has weighed on me over the last few months as I do this work is listening to those slaves describe the beatings that would happen on those plantations. And I want us to consider this as we talk about some of what Dr. Mims said a second ago concerning how we internally as a community are not being very honest about this gender disparity inside our community. What I've read over and over and over from those enslaved people in those narratives is that oftentimes plantation owner would appoint an overseer to administer these beatings. So I call it the overseer syndrome that I'm going to talk to you about, but the overseer would have been someone amongst the ranks of the enslaved who basically got a chance to get out of the fields. He would be the person to administer the beatings. So he delights now in this concept that I am not one of you, although he is, but for this momentary posture that I stand in as the overseer, I'm not one of you. I have a little bit power. And so you would imagine if you have endured slavery and you've worked in the fields and you've been beaten before, when you get that moment to administer the beatings to your brothers and sisters and wives and children, you might think that you would do that with a level of compassion.
Right.
But those slave narratives tell you that the overseer was way more violent than the plantation owner. And the reason for that is that that overseer never wanted to be relegated back to the ranks of one of you. The overseer's commitment was not to the collective group of people who in fact were like the overseer. The overseer was committed to convincing the white man that you can trust me, that I will betray my people in order to hold a little bit power. Now remember, you're on a plantation, so you ain't got no power, but just to get a little bit. So when Dr. Mims was talking, I just want us to understand that that mentality, we talk about Willie Lynch, do we really understand the overseer? Do we understand how often our oppression as African-American women come from people from our same group dynamic? Yes. People who have experienced the very pain that has crippled us, they know it better than we do. Right. So at that moment when they are free of it, you would think they would administer some level of compassion, but their commitment is to squeeze in the ounce of power they get. That has to be told to our girls and our boys and our sisters because their health condition depends on them understanding this.
Did you find any women overseers?
Did I find any women? Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. The women overseers were often worse than the male overseers toward the other women, which is all psychologically confusing because we were the most victimized.
Right, right.
So
misogynoir is a real thing.
Yes, yes.
So what's the thought process of the woman overseer?
The woman overseer, remember, you're not just working the fields. You're not just getting raped constantly. You're bringing in girls who you have to watch now be further victimized.
Right.
So those women could not develop a natural affinity for other women. You imagine the pain they would feel. If I learn to love and nurture women, I am watching victimization multiplied over and over again. Right. So it's a survival technique almost that it creates a level of self-hate. Right. Now, I don't know about you all, but nobody taught me any of this in any school that I attended in my life.
Oh, and do you see that overseas mortality still happening to this day?
Yes, yes. So I'm in a workforce trying to understand why I can't stand up in this crooked room. Right. Because nobody is teaching this history. And that is why what we're doing is so necessary. because now I have daughters who are in the workforce trying to figure out why they can't stand up, right?
Right.
Think about this for a second. We have this obligation because it's the only now way we're talking about Black men being killed by police. Women are also being killed.
By police.
It's not the police all day that's killing us, by the way.
And
if we do not identify our enemy, we don't identify who's pulling the trigger on us. Look at the number of Black women who lose their lives in this country every day.
Yes.
And it's not always the police.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
No, it's not. I'm just loving this so much.
Right.
One of the other things I want us to think about too is what it looks like today, right? Because the women overseers and the male overseers, they thought that they had arrived to a level that was above their brothers and sisters.
Right.
You didn't arrive. You the same Negro. You the same.
Right.
In your mind, somehow, you thought you had elevated above. So now you're looking down at them, and then you want to separate yourself apart. Oh, yeah, I'm going to go there. So you want to separate yourself. So now you're on the other side of town, right? And then you commenting to me about when you come to visit me in 7005. Negro, you just left here yesterday?
Thank you.
Yes. Absolutely.
How quickly do we forget?
Right. Exactly.
And then in this mentality of ours, we don't come back and reach back. Okay,
Sure
so you don't, I'm happy for you.
Sure
But what about coming back, giving? Yeah, I'm not saying pull them up out because they don't have to go. Because if all of us leave out of here, then what we gonna have left? Who's gonna be left here? I probably was about to get in trouble, Don, but I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna get in trouble, but I'm gonna say it. Who's gonna be left? The people who use a different address and say that they live over here, but you don't live over here. You live somewhere else. I said it.
Look, it is what it is.
Can't argue with the truth. Okay.
Exactly.
I am tired.
That's
There
right.
are those of us
Absolutely.
on this call. We're trying to pour into the next generation so we can go sit down. We're not trying to hold on. I know there's some of y'all that want us to go sit down. We can't go sit down because we haven't found anybody to replace us.
Right. Right.
I'm not trying to stay no longer in this role.
So look, just real quick, some housekeeping. My internet dropped real quick. Did y'all experience any disconnect?
No, it was
Okay,
on.
good. Because I was worried about that. Okay.
And so
All
these
right.
conversations are so important, Professor Bell, to help our children to understand, our people to understand not only the history, but what it looks like today. Because there is no different spirit under the sun. It's the same spirit.
Right.
So let me
Unfortunately, Dr. Mims, what's happening, we're not teaching that history because if you look at what's happening in our schools today, in published books, they're doing away with our history as it really was. They're writing the dynamics of how our history is for them. They want it to be for them to read it and say, oh, everything was fine then. And it's a shame that, just think about what the president said to publishers. We've got to get rid of that history in the history book because we're saying too much about slavery and all of that. Well, how are our children going to learn where they come from, where they get their grit from, where do they get their confidence from, where do they get who they are from? Where do they come from? What's their stock? And they can't get it unless we teach it because they're trying to eliminate it in our schools.
That's right.
Well, also, I want to make sure that everybody realizes that within the last 2 weeks, President Trump actually issued an executive order to all federal agencies telling them that they cannot even have a diversity training that uses the word white privilege.
Right.
They can't talk about anything from a critical race perspective. nor can they say America was racist or has a racist history. That is now prohibited in any federal agencies. If you think that is dangerous, you should also understand that most of the Southern history books were shaped by the daughters of the Confederacy.
That's
Right.
Those are the very same people who are responsible for putting those Confederate monuments all over the South.
right.
Those monuments were there not because they are a structure, but they are speech. They are conveying a message, and the message is federal government. You think you came down to the South and fought a civil war and ended our practices. The monuments were erected to let you know you did not win. The
Right.
Daughters of the Confederacy also has had a hand in any history book that is in the South of the state of the country to shape the narrative so that the South looks like a hero and that Black people don't have a voice in these stories that are told. So what we are describing so that people understand the true nature of Black experience and trauma, that was trauma on Black people.
That's right.
Not memorialized anywhere. So now you have history books that won't teach it to children. You have the federal government now saying it's not even permissible to talk about in this country. Yet last night, the clown in chief actually said that I celebrate bigotry.
Right.
So if we
Right.
do not do this work of counteracting that false narrative, we're setting up our girls to die early deaths because they really do not understand the paralysis that they will suffer as Black women in this country, not just trying to work and be exploited, not just trying to be married to Black men who don't understand their conditions, not just trying to watch all of our children be incarcerated, but we also are being killed by doctors, which is a point earlier that I wanted to address, and I'll make it brief. But I remember 27 years ago, roughly, going into a doctor with my first pregnancy, a white male doctor. And at that time, I think I may have been around a size 10 and gained 90 pounds. And every visit, the guy would cheer me on and say, "That's fine, that's your first child, you can eat all you want." I would tell him I was eating hamburgers and Sundays. He egged me on, I gained 90 pounds. I walked around for 25 years with that 90 pounds because I couldn't get it off. And I went to many doctors and said, "I don't know what's wrong. Something has to be wrong. I can't get this weight off. I know this can't be good." A Black female came up to me and said to me, I can tell you what's wrong. She said, no white male is going to tell you because you look the way they envision a Black woman to look. You are the Mamie. You're the jar of syrup that they're used to seeing in the morning, so they're not going to tell you anything is wrong with you. That Black woman, who is not a medical doctor, diagnosed me, told me what I needed to tell the medical doctors. I did all of that and lost about 60 pounds naturally, no medication. I say that to tell you that had I not done that, had I not had that intervention, I would have diabetes and a host of other health problems that I don't experience today. I question all of my sisters who are not getting competent medical care because their physicians have a viewpoint of how they should look based again on this history, this conditioning that we suffer from as a nation, where nobody is undoing this type of damage. And so for a white medical doctor to see a Black woman look like the Auntie Mama syrup, that seems normal to them. It is not normal, and we're not receiving the care we need because of that perception.
So look, before the internet dropped the second time, and we coming down to like our last 7 or 6 minutes, I wanted to touch on, and Dr. Mims touched on it. She hit it a couple of times. You know, in preparation for this, I got this book called Gender Talk, The Fight for Equality Inside the African American Community. And It's a very powerful book. And in the intro, they were explaining, the two authors, how they came to write the book together. And they touched on, and they are about maybe in their 60s or so. So they touched on something that I had not considered. And I don't know if it's generational or not, but I wanted to introduce this. They mentioned that it had been taboo to have the conversation of gender inequality within the African American community. And then later on, they didn't necessarily connect this, but I did. They also talked about the lower rates of marriage in the African American community. And I and Maria, of all of the participants here tonight, are the only two ladies that are single. Okay, I've been married. It was not a healthy relationship in any form or fashion, and so I had to end that. And so I've been happily divorced for the past 2 decades. Now, I say that to say my lived experience is similar to the statistic. And so then when they lifted up this idea of having this very conversation having been taboo, and I didn't even think that it would be something taboo, to be quite honest. And I don't know if that's something that's generational or because I'm a single woman for so long, that it didn't cross my mind. But when they mention those two things, that we don't like to have the conversation between Black men and Black women and the disparity, and we choose not to marry at higher rates, then my question is, are the two related? You know, are the two related? If you know, are we hindering our own relationships by not having these kind of conversations?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Could you explain the question?
Well, so the question is, they had explained that in the African American community, it has been taboo to talk about disparities that between the Black men and Black women. Mm-hmm. Okay, the inequality within the African American community. And so then when I also consider that we choose not to marry at higher rates, or than others, then my question is there any correlation or cause and effect? Or is it just coincidence that while we choose not to address our various concerns with each other, that and coincidentally, we also choose not to marry at higher rates?
I think it all ties into the greater system of racism and how we've all been impacted and how we internalize it. Because I really honestly believe the fact that Black people cannot perpetuate racism. You know, we can exhibit forms of bigotry and discriminate amongst each other. But as far as the systemic power structure, we don't hold that weight, right? So with us just internalizing that, it also stems from lingering trauma. And I do believe that trauma can be passed from generation to generation. I've been reading this book from Dr. Joy DeGroy called The Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And it impacts so many of these unfortunate stigmas, you know, that really plague our community as a whole and how we interact with each other. And I do believe that the steps for us to really heal, we have to have these conversations, going back to what Dr. Mims referred to. Those are steps to healing, having those honest conversations. What you don't reveal, you don't heal. You really don't. And we've always operated from a sense of suppressing, saying, oh, if you don't talk about it, it'll go away. We just need to move on, and just pray it out. It's all those things. And even the stigma of therapy, like therapy has like yesterday just became an okay thing amongst the Black community, where it's like, hey, we're going to therapy, we're going to talk it out. And we've been do this for so long. And even if you think about post slavery in that era, where we went through the Reconstruction period, all these great Greek organizations got founded. We showed the progression of the Black community, because you had Black people that were going to college, getting degrees, and also learning Greek. Okay, that says a lot to where Black people were at that time. People becoming business owners and real entrepreneurs. Madam C.J. Walker, first full-fledged millionaire, self-made Black woman. It really speaks to that time. But then again, none of these people had any real system of healing, because these are people like maybe 1 to 2 generations down from slavery, where we just moved on from that. We didn't really, they just released us out. That's all. There wasn't really any profound systems of healing and therapy to think, hey, these people may have been traumatized. I remember it was one lecture Joy DeGroy even talked about, with really peeling back the horrific, inhumane experiences of people with slavery, where even physical exhaustion, where a man's muscle detached from his bicep because of working it so long, and not to even mention how they've experimented on us. They experimented on our wombs, just for the sake of science and gaining clout in that respect. I never, once I found the history behind John Hopkins, I can't revere a man like that. And to know that he has an institution now named after him, and it's just, a lot of people feel, even Black people, Black women even, feeling esteemed to say, hey, I have a degree from this institution and it's worth something. But you just remember what that institution was built off of. That I always say this, I do believe we are due reparations, and reparations should be a package deal where it's not just a check, but it's other aspects where we can be made whole. And therapy is definitely one of them that's on the list, amongst other things. But it's a lot of healing to be done. It's a lot of trauma we harbor, and how we perpetuate that trauma is how we treat it, and also how we think of a society as a whole.
All right, so 7:32, we 2 minutes overdue from closing out. I just want to, did anybody have some last thoughts before I just?
There was so much that needed to be said in the question that you raised, and I know we're out of time, but I do want to address the issue about trauma. Trauma is not just a trauma that is experienced directly. Trauma can be experienced indirectly, right? And it can be, therefore it can be vicarious. And the piece that oftentimes people miss is the conditioning of the mind, and consequently the behavior as a result of the trauma. I do believe that we are still suffering from the effects of slavery. When we talk about the relationship between the Black man and the Black woman in the competition, we didn't talk about it, but it's there is sometimes this competition, because in some ways women had greater access to some things than men had access to, and there was a bit of resentment. And I know we're out of time, but when I think about the absence of the Black man in the home, that's systemic from slavery. You didn't have a wife. You didn't have a family. You bred. And so they weren't really yours. We didn't have formal marriages. So how is it? And for people to say, oh, it's been 300 years, y'all to have a different perspective. Not if that's how I was conditioned mentally. Slavery was as mental as it was physical.
And so, and to be clear, when I posed the question, it was not an oversight, and I'm not saying that that's what you just said, but I know we have a broad audience, so I just want to be clear about where I'm coming from. When I posed the question, it was not overlooking the traumatic history that gets passed down from generation to generation. But the question came from a place of the rates of choosing not to marry is increasing, right? And so, so I guess I'm just kind of exploring it. I don't really have, I'm just at a place of exploration, really. I don't have anything else.
I think that we'd have to consider is it a real choice? Is it an independent choice, or is it a forced choice? You know, and I'm gonna be real quick. I have done my family genealogy.
Mm-hmm.
I have done it from an identity perspective, who's who. I'm a descendant of the Binghams, and we have traced our lineage to come across on the ship.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And the Bingham name comes from the ship captain, Tom Bingham, right? But I've also done a genealogy with my children to understand characteristics of behavior. Right? And so I'm gonna be real quick, because one of the things that I pointed out to my sons is that I can point to generations on both sides where the men abandoned the women, abandoned their families, right? And I still believe that that is a part of slavery. One of the Binghams was a breeder. That's all he did. He never had on any clothes, because all he did was breed.
Yes, Lord.
His job was to have sex and have children for the plantation owner, right?
And can you imagine also, if you're breeding, you are violating your own women.
Right. Yeah.
So how do we have a loving dynamic with each other if that is the way we have been taught to interface?
Yes.
If I'm not raping you, I am watching you be raped. So how can I respect you as a protector, because you were robbed of that ability? So what we bring to our relationships with each other, because I do agree, trauma is intragenerational. So all of this stuff we carry. So as Black women, we can't view our men as protectors because of that history when they couldn't protect. We can't interface positively because they were violating us. So who has sat us down to help us through this? Normally that is when you go through some type of healing. Where's the healing?
Right.
Where is the healing? And so I think that speaks to why you don't see families bonding the way they should, because we need to heal from this. And that has never happened yet.
No.
And so that's that was a part of my journey to understanding me, right? As a person of African descent, that I've been able to share with my sons. And at that time, 5 generations I could trace. And so I would say, then how could you be surprised that if on my line that I have male siblings that never had that bonding, that abandoned their families, right? It's not an indictment. I want you to understand.
Right.
I applaud you for doing that too. That's a powerful gift to your children. That's a powerful gift.
And you know, a lot of that was perpetuated and continued when welfare came in, where they told parents, a family, you can live here, but the man can't live here. And so it was continued in that respect. We'll take care of you, but we can't take care of him. And so what happened? The whole family issue just went to pot. You know, it just disseminated. And that was what was happening from slavery up until that part. And it's still happening today.
Right.
Yeah.
We're in a unique position to not look to the nuclear structure of family as the Black community, because it's just, if we're going to take an audit of where we're at, that's not us. That's not an honest audit. And we have to be honest with ourselves, and we really have to define what family really means. I'm proud to say that I like operating from the village, because even though I was in a 2-parent household, it was the village that helped me and cultivate me into the young Black woman people see today, because parents need help all the way around, regardless, you know. And there's no such thing as the perfect parent, you know. And I really believe that the Creator assigns us to our parents and to our children, you know. And we have to, working from what even Dr. Mims even said earlier about us thinking within that communal context and getting away from individualism in a way too, because that's just not who we are, you know.
That's not who we are. I'll say with my sons and educating my children about what I call generational blessings and curses, is that I want them to understand it so that they can recognize these visitations when they come, right? And to do something different, because for me, having that experience and having that journey, I vowed that I'm not going to have children in the world I don't have a relationship with. That's not going to happen on my line. I can't speak for somebody else, but not on my line. So if you bring them here, there's going to be a connection and a relationship. Oh, I'm going to remind you every day of your life. Right? Because I understand the impact of that. I am a product of divorce. I am a product of abandonment. And I understand the impact. My being a teenage mother didn't have nothing to do with me being fast, hot, juicy, whole, easy. It had nothing to do with that. It had to do with looking for love in all the wrong places and all the wrong faces. And then if you understand the psychology of how we have been created, we have been created with the need not only to be loved, but to give love. We have been created to have that bond between our parents, us and our parents, and girls with their fathers and sons with their mothers. And when that bond does not exist, for whatever reason, there is an aftermath.
That's powerful.
You understand that if you're going to change anything.
Right.
All right. Well, I'm gonna be respectful of everyone's time. I thank y'all so much for joining me in this discussion. And maybe we'll get together again soon. I want to let people know that I do have some other roundtable talk scheduled on every Tuesday except the second Tuesday of October. Check out my Facebook page for the lineup. And I hope you can join me. Those conversations will be more specific around healthcare, as well as rethinking policing. And we will be joined by the awesome Chief Murphy Paul and Dr. Joe Hicks, who is a retiree and a resident of Broadmoor community, and he's going to bring some info about community policing. And we have Judge Don Johnson, not Ron Johnson, and others. And so I hope you all will join us on those two important. And Dr. Leah Cullins will be with us again on the healthcare panel. She just loved me. She just got to be on all my stuff. So thank you, ladies. I love y'all tremendously. Thank you for sharing yourself, and thank you for being part of my, healing process. It means a lot. Thank you.
And thank you for organizing this. This is incredibly important, and I appreciate you doing it.
Yes,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dawn.
All of my friends.
Good to see everybody.
Yes.
Good night.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.